September 19th, 2019, pictures surfaced of Justin Trudeau in blackface. Now, it seems he had gone to a costume party, was assaulted, and painted his face black, which really shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, being that he plays dress-up more than a cosplayer on his way to Comic-Con. And here's where he visited India. And here's him with the Sutina tribe. Now, in his defense, they gave him that headdress. But here's him at a Vancouver Chinatown parade. I don't know. I think the Sultan might have been his best. I mean, after all, he did have some practice. Here's him in blackface back in high school, too. Now, normally this is when the media would all high-five each other and do the Mexican hat dance and then put on serious face 30 seconds before the cameras start rolling and pretend like they think blackface is racist, which is ridiculous. I mean, if you're offended by blackface, you might need anger management. I'm not a psychiatrist or anything, just throwing it out there. You probably have other issues you might want to resolve first. But the news doesn't care. Typically, when someone is caught having fun at a costume party with makeup they deem too dark, they will literally destroy their life over it. Because let's face it, I mean, the news would sell it their own mother if it meant a fresh chance to fan racial tensions and cause overall chaos and misery.
Florida's Secretary of State, an individual who was appointed by Republican Governor DeSantis, has stepped down. He has resigned following the reemergence of a photo from years ago where he is at a Halloween party in blackface, appearing to mock a Hurricane Katrina survivor.
It's not like you shouldn't correct them. You should. You say, hey, that has an awful history in this country and was used to mock African Americans, and in fact, provoked violence against them and got a lot of people killed.
The first example was from 2001, and then the third example is from the early 1990s. In that example, he was also wearing an afro and blackface.
Yeah, so, and he has profusely apologized, said it was wrong, it was racist. He just didn't know it as well as he should have at the time, etc. Okay, so he shouldn't have done the blackface. I'm not defending him on that at all. On the brown face, I don't think there's any such thing. So I like when the scandal was first about brownface, I'm like, that's not a thing.
But not this time. This time, it was the king of the social justice fairies himself, Justin Trudeau. So of course it was squashed and we could finally go back to laughing at this sort of stuff.
I'll take care of Mr. White.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Bob.
That was a close one.
It certainly was.
We don't have to bother with these formalities, do we, Mr. White?
What a silly Negro.
What the fuck did I just hear?
Just take what you want, Mr. White. Pay us back any time, or don't. We don't care.
I can remember it like it was yesterday. White people marching in the streets demanding retribution for Eddie Murphy appropriating our culture. But all joking aside, this instance with the blackface picture brings us to the now increasingly common occurrence of future proves past, because on September 19th of 2018, exactly 1 year to the day of this photo being leaked, an anon had asked if there was anything on Trudeau, and Q replied, billionaires murdered, Five Eyes, which is an intelligence agency comprised of Australia, New Zealand, England, Canada, and the United States, where they basically have an agreement to surveil each other and share info. Then it says safety house built, and that Uranium1 was funneled through Canada to most likely would be Iran, would be my guess. Now, quick recap of the Uranium1 deal. That's back in 2009 when the Russian state nuclear corporation Rosatom, acting through its subsidiary arms, began purchasing stakes in the Toronto-based uranium mining company Uranium1. Now, Uranium1 has US-based operations too, being run through Jab and Antelope, which produce at the very least 10% of the United States uranium per year. By 2013, Arms had finally bought out the remaining shares, assuming direct ownership and delisting it from the Toronto Stock Exchange. Now, because of their operations in the United States, the Obama administration and Secretary of State Clinton had to approve this acquisition.
Warned us about this, and you said there's about $145 million in kickbacks to the Clinton Foundation total?
Yeah, that's right. $145 million that we know about comes from a variety of sources, but it's basically 9 shareholders in this Uranium1 company, guys like Frank Justra, Sergey Kurzin, and others. And there's a major story to be told there, not only about how this deal was approved, but how this deal was put together, and the fact that the Clintons made a lot of money by basically helping the Russians to corner the world uranium market.
And that's what Vladimir Putin set out to do. Our FBI knew it, our Department of Justice knew it, and they still let it happen. That's inconceivable.
That's right, Sean. And let's add to that list, by the way, Hillary Clinton knew about it. I mean, as I point out in the book, and anybody can go to WikiLeaks and look at, there were State Department cables classified that came out in WikiLeaks that were going to Hillary Clinton, top secret, that were talking about the fact that the Russians were looking to corner the world uranium market. They were active in Kazakhstan, they were active elsewhere, and that it was a strategic goal of Vladimir Putin to try to grab as much of the world uranium market as possible. So she was informed about this. She knew about this and apparently didn't care.
Now, technically, the current licenses being held by the U.S.-based subsidiaries approved by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission do not allow exports from any Uranium1 facilities in the United States. However, according to Senator John Barrasso from Wyoming, where most of these facilities are located, from this clip back in April of 2015, he states that that was not the case.
The Nuclear Regulatory Commission says that you can't export uranium from the United States, even if the Russians own this, unless they get a license to do the particular export. Is the Nuclear Regulatory Agency now giving the license for these particular exports to these Russian companies?
They have not given they were supposed to contact me immediately if there actually even was a request for a license to export.
Has there been a request?
Not that I know, but I know that uranium has left the country. They've got a number of different companies and shell organizations.
But this Russian company hasn't been able to take out the uranium out of the country.
When you talk to people on the ground, uranium has left the United States, has gone to Canada, has gone overseas, and our concern is it's at the fundamental of American uranium, 20% of our capacity here in the United States, and for nuclear power. We need to import uranium. We've continued to do that. Nuclear power provides about 20% of the electricity for our country. I think there's an issue of national security as well as energy security, and I worry about Iran getting this uranium. Uranium has left the United States, has gone to Canada.
So now with all that in mind, let's go back to this post and answer the question, who were the billionaires that were found murdered? Barry and Honey Sherman were pharmaceutical tycoons with close ties to Justin Trudeau. They were both found early December of 2017 dead in their home of an apparent murder-suicide. Now, interestingly enough, Barry Sherman had just begun trying to stop an investigation that had just been launched, looking into his fundraising for Prime Minister Trudeau just days before he was found dead. Karen Shepherd, Canada's Commissioner of Lobbying, had begun issuing subpoenas to Apotex executives. Now, this was in reference to an August 2015 fundraiser event Sherman had held for Trudeau. There was even a second investigation into a November 2016 fundraiser, which was then dropped. 6 weeks after the bodies were found, police revealed that they believed the pharmaceutical billionaires were actually murdered, describing their deaths as targeted killings. Now, the fundraiser, which he was trying to stop the investigation on, was held at Sherman's residence in August of 2015. It was a dinner party that included the likes of Mick Jagger and a hefty price tag of over $1,000 a plate, with some reports going as high as $1,500 a plate. Now, ask yourself this. What possibly could have been so big as to get two of the more powerful people in Canada with direct ties to the Prime Minister murdered? I mean, sure, being involved in illegally obtaining funding for the Prime Minister is bad, but there had to be something else. So what I decided to do was take a look at the fundraiser itself, and it seems that it was being boycotted that night by the Jewish Defense League, who were upset about their support for the Iran deal, where Obama had sent pounds of cash to Iran and agreed to share nuclear technology with them. Now, it just so happens that the Iran deal was signed in July of 2015, only 1 month prior to this fundraiser. Now, what do you need to make nukes? Uranium, which was funneled through Canada to, I would say, Iran. Now, is it possible that Trudeau and Sherman were making plans that night to use his company Apotex as a vehicle to deliver said uranium? After all, they would be perfect for the job. According to United Against Nuclear Iran's business registry, you will find that Apotex is in fact one of the companies on the list that does still do business in Iran. Now, is that a coincidence that a fundraiser for Justin Trudeau was being held at the house of a company that shipped drugs to Iran only 1 month after the Iran deal was signed, and that not long after investigation into said fundraiser was launched, they're both murdered? It certainly is interesting, I'll tell you that much. Now, another more recent controversy had come to light this past March, where the Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould had first resigned and then testified that senior members of Trudeau's government and Trudeau himself had strong-armed her into not prosecuting SNC-Lavalin, a major Canadian engineering firm, in a case where they allegedly paid the regime of Muammar Gaddafi tens of millions of dollars in bribes from 2001 to 2011. It was during that time frame as well that SNC-Lavalin had directed $93,000 in illegal campaign contributions to Canada's Liberal Party, a party which Trudeau became leader of 2 years later in 2013. And 1 week after Wilson-Raybould revealed that Trudeau had pressured her to not prosecute Lavalin, his Treasury Board President Jane Philpott also resigned from his cabinet.
And U.S. concerns about Chinese steel being dumped in Canada. Has Canada received clearance to use imported Asian steel for these LNG projects? And why not use domestic products instead of importing foreign steel without duties?
We have been steadfast supporters of the Canadian steel and aluminum industries. We knew when the Americans brought in unfair 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum that we had to stand strong, and that's why we brought in dollar-for-dollar countermeasures that ended up being effective.
Now, speaking of China, some pushes for communism over the years have been more obvious, like China, the Bolshevik Revolution, and even Cuba. But they have been doing this everywhere. The European Union is a body of unelected officials that presides over most of Europe in a very socialistic sense. Even countries like Canada have their people in place to help slowly change it over to communism. I believe Justin to be one of these people. Someone put in place to help break down and prepare Canada for a slow transition into communism. And of course, by communism, I mean realistically socialism, because that's all communism is an unrealistic revamping of socialism, which is connected to the usual suspects, of course, being that, surprise, surprise, Karl Marx was a third cousin of the Rothschilds. Now, Justin's first step was important tens of thousands of people whose values did not align with the average Canadians and whose laws also did not align. The purpose of this was to destabilize Canada's local communities. He vowed to take in 25,000 Syrian refugees, yet here he is telling an injured ex-soldier that veterans' funding cuts were because the government couldn't afford it.
Why are we still fighting against certain veterans groups in court? Because they are asking for more than we are able to give right now.
But then he gives $38 million to pro-jihad group UNRWA. He gave $23 million to the Council on Canadian Muslims and even awarded $10 million to a convicted jihadist from Gitmo. And on top of that, he apologized to this animal. But to someone who's trying to restructure a country, Islamic migrants aren't a threat, they're an asset. You need assets to disrupt and bring chaos. You need chaos to foster fear. If your country's at peace and the economy's strong and there's no civil unrest, why would anyone ever want to change anything? But if their communities are being overrun by people with completely different customs and belief systems, some of which who are committing acts of rape and terror, you have the perfect environment for change. community doesn't know what the clear-cut answer is, but they know that something has to be done. And while they're fighting with each other on what should be done, you can begin to openly push ideas that would have been considered crazy years ago. Like here, when Prime Minister Trudeau essentially tells everyone his plans by praising communist China.
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China, because their basic dictatorship is allowing them to actually turn their economy around on a dime and say, we need to go green as fast as we need to start investing in solar. I mean, there is a flexibility that I know Stephen Harper must dream about, of having a dictatorship that he could do everything he wanted.
Now, one of the more famous warnings for this slow communist takeover was by one Eric Arthur Blair, known better to us by his pen name, George Orwell. He wrote of a full-fledged communist-style dictatorship in 1984. That is why this book is banned from schools. It includes passages such as this that address non-gender specific pronouns. "Oh, comrade," she began in a dreary, whining sort of voice. "I thought I heard you come in. Do you think that you could come across and have a look at our kitchen sink? It's gotten blocked up." And it was Mrs. Parsons, the wife of a neighbor of the same floor. Mrs. was a word somewhat discountenanced by the party. You were supposed to call everyone comrade. Now let's see how Comrade Justin feels about this passage.
Maternal love is the love that's going to change the future of mankind. So we'd like you to look
we like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive.
There we go, exactly. Yes, thank you.
We can all learn from each other.
Well, what do you know? Just like in the book 1984, blurring the lines and doing away with gender-specific pronouns. Now, surely it's not a crime to think someone is the gender they were born. Thought crimes are yet another established rule of law in 1984's Oceania. Well, right in line with the book, a law was just passed in Canada making it illegal to call someone the wrong pronoun, which would now be considered a hate crime and could even result in jail time. And what's another way to break down society? By confusing young men into acting effeminate and even promoting cross-dressing.
I really want to make sure that my sons are raised from now with an understanding and awareness of the power dynamics that surround them and surround their sister, and are taught and learned to be allies from the very beginning. There's a mindset shift that will benefit us all when women don't feel worried that they're going to be in vulnerable position.
Well, unless it's Justin himself, because then it's okay. Here's an article back in 2000 where this reporter claims that Justin sexually assaulted her at the annual Kokanee Summit. She stated that Justin later apologized, saying that if he knew she was a reporter, he wouldn't have. Oh, well, that's good to know. So if you don't have a voice to speak up about these sort of things, then being sexually harassed by Justin Trudeau is open season.
I have always been someone who, reacts strongly to emotional stimuli, and that means I've cried in public a number of times, more than perhaps the stoic, manly man should in the old way of looking at things. I think a lot of my perspectives on masculinity was shaped by the values that my father has, his strength, his athleticism, using his strengths to stand up for people who needed help, to be there for supporting the little guy, for countering bullies. Being a man is being strong and a source of support for those who need it.
And just who was Justin Trudeau's dad? Many claim the young prime minister's biological father to be none other than Fidel Castro. Now, these rumors were stirred up yet again in February 2018 when Castro's eldest son committed suicide. Several sites had begun reporting right away that he had left a note behind, even providing a full transcript of it. The alleged note had contained quite the surprising revelation. He had wrote that Fidel was, quote, always comparing me unfavorably with Justin and dismissing my achievements in comparison to his success in Canada. Then he laments, but what am I to do? I'm Cuban, my brother's Canadian. If he was born and raised in Cuba, he would have lived in our father's shadow forever just like me. Now, obviously, without an actual picture of the note, it's hard to verify its authenticity. So the first thing I tried to verify was, is it plausible? Could Margaret Trudeau have had an affair with Fidel Castro leading to the conception of baby Justin? Now, judging by Margaret alone, yeah, absolutely. She was notorious for partying around Manhattan, Studio 54, constantly being accused of infidelity. And one famous case was when she spent her 6th wedding anniversary partying with the Rolling Stones, where rumors were spreading that she even had an affair with Mick Jagger. Now, of course, she denied this claim, but it was only one of many from that time period. Now, on top of that, the Trudeaus and Castro did have a famous friendship during this time in the 70s. And you can see that from these pictures here in their 1976 trip down to Cuba, with many pictures of Castro and Trudeau's holding baby Michael, Justin's younger brother. Margaret, in fact, was once even quoted as calling Castro the sexiest man she had ever met. Now, Justin was born December 25th, 1971, so this means they would have had to have met at least as early as spring of 71, as according to Snopes, the gestation period for conception would have been between March 16th and April 22nd. Now, I know this because when you Google Justin being Castro's son, it, shocker, is the first article that comes up, to which they answer a resounding false. Oh, case closed, guys. Nothing to see here. They even take a side-by-side someone made of Justin and Fidel at the same age and superimpose them over each other to make it look like some crackpot comparison, only looking similar because they're over each other and the whole thing being a stretch. Well, here's the original side-by-side. Don't worry, there'll be more picture comparisons in a moment. So March 16th to April 22nd. All right, first we'd have to establish an initial meeting of Trudeau and Castro, and this comes in the way of telephone back in 1970 during the October crisis when the Canadian government sought to negotiate the exile of members of the Front de Libération de Québec, or the FLQ, to Cuba. Now, Fidel Castro obliged Prime Minister late December 1970 by providing a refuge and even later extending his heartfelt gratitude to Pierre. Well, it just so happens that only 4 months later, Pierre and Margaret took a surprise second honeymoon to Barbados on Thursday, April 8th, 1971, as reported by the Ottawa Journal. The article states that Prime Minister Trudeau and his wife Margaret had arrived that Thursday, the 8th, and had left Barbados on Monday, which would be April 12th, by chartered plane on a quick trip to an unidentified nearby island, and that heavy security measures had been in effect for the entire time to ensure the couple's privacy. So on April 12th, which according to Snopes falls directly in the gestation period for Justin's conception, Margaret and Pierre had been in the Caribbean, only a short plane ride away from Fidel Castro, whom Pierre had just recently become acquainted with only 4 months earlier on a spur-of-the-moment second honeymoon, which was mired in secrecy due to heavy security, on which they chartered a plane to a, quote, unidentified nearby island. So yes, to Trudeau's new Castro, and yes, Margaret was in the vicinity of Fidel during the gestation period and even took a secret trip to an unidentified island. 9 months later, Justin was born, and he grew up to be the spitting image of a young Fidel Castro. You can even see Fidel here giving Justin a warm embrace during Pierre's funeral. And finally, on his own passing in 2016, Justin had these words to say. It is with deep sorrow that I learned today of the death of Cuba's longest-serving president. Fidel Castro was a larger-than-life leader who served his people for almost half a century, a legendary revolutionary and orator. Mr. Castro made significant improvements to the education and healthcare of his island. While a controversial figure, Mr. Castro's supporters and detractors recognized his tremendous dedication and love for the Cuban people, who had a deep and lasting affection for El Comandante. I think there'd be quite a lot of Cuban defectors who would disagree with that. He continues, I know my father was very proud to call him a friend, and I had the opportunity to meet Fidel when my father passed away. As this looked like two people who have never met before? It was a real honor to meet his three sons and his brother, President Raul Castro, during my recent visit to Cuba. On behalf of all Canadians, Sophie and I offer our deepest condolences to the family, friends, and many, many supporters of Mr. Castro. We join the people of Cuba today in the mourning of the loss of this remarkable leader.
Recuerdo devoto a los héroes caídos en esta hora de triunfo y mi reconocimiento emocionado y profundo al pueblo de Cuba, que es hoy orgullo y ejemplo de América.
So just to recap, Trudeau has cut veterans' fundings while donating millions to radical Islam sympathizers and literal terrorists. He's publicly praised China's dictatorship. He's on the record of sexually harassing a reporter back in 2000. His attorney general just testified that he made her drop the charges on a company for allegedly giving millions of dollars to Gaddafi and tens of thousands to Justin's own party. And in 2018, an investigation was launched into one of his 2015 fundraisers, a fundraiser which was being boycotted over the Iran deal at the house of the founder of Apotex, a company that shipped drugs to Iran, only months after Senator Barrasso had revealed that uranium was in fact being moved to Canada despite stipulations of the US NRC, and only 1 month after said Iran deal was signed, giving Iran nuclear technology. Only weeks after the investigation was launched into Justin's fundraiser, the founder of Apotex and his wife were murdered in that very house that the fundraiser was held in. And since he's become prime minister, China has been allowed to dump cheap steel all over the country. It has become illegal to think someone's the wrong gender, and masculine pronouns have started to be eradicated, going so far as to change the line in Canada's own national anthem from "In All Thy Sons Command" to "In All of Us Command," mirroring Oceania, 1984's communist dictatorship. And what better way to usher in communism to Canada than the proverbial wolf in sheep's clothing, the supposed son of former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, who turned out to actually be the son of one of the most famous communist dictators in the history of the world. Where we go one, we go all.
The Liberal Party believes that terrorists should get to keep their Canadian citizenship. Because I do. And I'm willing to take on anyone who disagrees with that.
A day after Justin Trudeau praised the Cuban leader, today he was asked if he felt Castro was a dictator.
Yes.
Must dream about of having a dictatorship that he could do everything he wanted.
Feel important. The Corps commander said he would not be surprised if I was prime minister someday. Said he hoped he would live to see it.
We like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind, because it's more inclusive.
There we go.
Why are we still fighting against certain veterans groups in court? Because they're asking for more than we are able to give right now.
You sometimes hear about liberal bias in the media these days, how they're constantly letting our government off the hook for no good reason. Frankly, I think that's insulting. It's clear that they let us off the hook for a very good reason, because we paid them $600 million.